Hi, I'm Shona Lee. I am with the Art of Yearning. This would normally be a Tuesday tune-up, but A, it's Thursday, and B, the subject is a little more complicated than a tune-up this week. This week, I want to talk to you about the fact that you can never know what impact your work is going to have. I was reading I came across a new writer yesterday, and his work stopped me dead in my tracks. I took a step back from everything I was doing, and I paused and I contemplated and I read and I read and I read. And I'm not going to talk about him today. I'm going to talk about him next week because I want to talk about who he reminded me of that was from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, around 20 years ago, I guess, maybe not quite that long, I was going to graduate school and I was studying education and I was working in instructional design and I was really interested in the structures of disciplinary knowledge. I was working as a faculty developer at a big university. I was shared across the entire university, so I might be working with science professors and nursing professors and business professors all in the same day. So I needed to be really flexible and fluid with my own structures of knowledge so that I could work within the framework of the people that I was working with. So as part of that, I was reading across disciplines a lot, and I was going to the stacks and pulling books about disciplinary knowledge and about the structures of knowledge. And basically, I was just studying how does knowledge work without knowing necessarily, without being in epistemology, but that was, effectively the kind of world that I was in. And so I went to the library one day, and this is not the book I was looking for. I was looking on the shelves, and you're at the library and you're looking for this book, and the one up here catches your eye. So this one up here, I pulled off the shelf and I was like, oh, that's interesting. It had two fancy words on the cover. It said pedagogy and hermeneutics. And I had encountered hermeneutics, but it was a new thing for me, I think, pretty new. And so hermeneutics, if you don't know, which I expect most people who have not been to grad school to study philosophy or religious studies or sociology or one of those humanities, or, I don't know what the category is, but let's say arts, the arts. Humanities, those fields, les sciences humanistiques, hermeneutics is about textual interpretation, and it comes from the interpretation of religious texts, and I believe it comes from rabbinical interpretations of the Talmud. I'm not 100% sure on that. You're free to correct me, and please don't call me names if you do so. The question is, how do you interpret the text? How do you get to what God really meant if you're looking at a religious text? And then subsequently, if you're looking at texts in more general sense, how do you get to what the author really meant? What is the relationship between the author and the reader? What is the interpretation's relationship to the intention? So that's sort of the broad, wavy description of hermeneutics. Anyway, this book called Pedagogy and Hermeneutics was by Sean Gallagher, whom I have never met, and this book of his is like my only interaction with him. What I want to say is, reading that book outside of my discipline, outside of my field, outside of what I was supposed to be doing with that trip to the library, impacted so much of my thinking subsequently because he divided up textual interpretations and people's perceptions of how texts are interpreted into 4 categories. He talked about conservative hermeneutics, which is one in which you assume that the author had an intention, and the job of the reader is to find out what that intention was and reproduce it to the best of their ability. Then he talked about radical hermeneutics, and I believe he made reference to Marx in this case. And he said in radical hermeneutics, he said it actually had that thing in common with the conservative hermeneutics, which is that it assumes that there is an intent in the author. It assumes that there's a correct interpretation of the text, but the reader's job is to resist the text. And so you're supposed to look at, what is this really about? Not, this is going to make me feel better about my role as something or other, but this is a tool of social control designed to make me more useful, productive. It's for somebody else's benefit. So that's that radical interpretation of text. Then he talked about post-structuralists, which I believe Derrida was the main the main post-structuralist that he referred to. Derrida is, I'm going to say, notorious for talking about the impossibility of actually getting to the root meaning of a text. And what he said was that words have to be defined using more words. And behind those words are more words, and behind those words are more words. And so this is what is referred to as the endlessly deferred signifier. That the signifier and the signified are apart. The word and the thing it's describing are apart. And they're apart in such a way that you can never close the gap between them. That the process of, sorry, my nose is running. The process of trying to close that gap is an impossible one. So he talked about playfulness. He talked about he gave an enormous amount of power to the reader to deconstruct texts and play with the words and get underneath them and, do things with them that the author never intended, if you go back to the original sort of interpretation of texts in those previous two descriptions. And then he talked about the fourth approach, and he took this sort of measured middle way approach, and he talked about Gadamer's approach to interpretation, that the text has some meaning, the author intended something, and I think the example was Twelfth Night can never be Romeo and Juliet, that the reader has latitude to make different interpretations, but the reader's interpretations are reasonably restricted by the actual text to work with and what the author intended. And so this piece is this description of textual interpretation that I came away with. And that probably had almost as much impact on me as the whole other graduate program and all the hundreds of papers that I read and the thousands of pages of books, textbooks that I was given, was this sense that, this is the relationship between the author, the text, and the reader have a relationship, and it's unclear what that relationship is, and there are parameters around that relationship. Now, I'm not going to start teaching graduate programs. I'm not going to start telling you about hermeneutics, although I think I just told you pretty much everything I know about hermeneutics. I think that's it right there. And that's what informs so much of my work, is that graduate background. But Sean Gallagher doesn't know I read that book. Sean Gallagher wrote that book 25 years ago or something, when he was, I think, pretty early in his academic career. And there's no way for him to predict, 25 years from now, someone's going to make a YouTube video talking about how much impact this book had on their thinking. That's not a reasonable outcome. So my work is actually about letting go of the expectation that you're going to know what the outcome is. So I'm going to tell you about hermeneutics, and I'm going to tell you about text, because subsequently I use that sort of hermeneutics and textual approach to look at knowability of the universe and how different disciplines think about what's knowable and how you build models of knowledge. Um, but he he was writing a book about teaching in the classroom, and I made it into information about interpreting how consciousness arises. And so, you don't know how your information, how your knowledge, how your sharing is going to land with other people. You don't know where the impacts are going to be. And so, there's so much where we're like dying for impact. Oh my God, we want our work to matter and we want there to be likes and shares. And yay, I know that I made a difference. But, maybe the difference is going to be put a book on a shelf in a different country in a library you've never been to, and somebody pulls it off the shelf and thinks about it for 20 years without ever talking to you about it. That can happen. So that's my tune up with a huge yay! I don't have to go to grad school to learn this thing, maybe, unless that's like so compelling that now you have to go to grad school and learn that thing. My name is Shona. I am at the Art of Yearning on Facebook, and my name, Shona, Seonaid, which is Gaelic, Lee.com, has some of my writings. Not all of them, they're all over the place. So hop on to the Art of Yearning at Facebook is the best way to actually talk to me, and then we can talk about all kinds of things: philosophy, education, permaculture, meditation, all kinds of good stuff. I hope that I will hear from you and you will ask questions and tell me things and get super excited about ideas with me. I'll talk to you again. Bye. I have to press stop now.